Jack in Florida, pronouns are he, him. Welcome to the show. You're on with Justin and Matt.
Hey, Jack, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going, Matt?
Not bad.
Right, remember me from our last encounter. I didn't get a chance to respond to you, but hopefully my connection is better this time. Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you about the transcendental argument for God and whether or not, let's see, like what response you're going to give. So what I'm going to say is that there are these certain categories, right, in philosophy or branches of philosophy, such as metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. And ultimately, we're going to have fundamental assumptions, or like what I call baseline assumptions, for what's true or what isn't true within those domains. And there's this dilemma called as you would know, the Munchausen dilemma, which states that either our worldviews are going to bottom out at a foundationalist paradigm, we're going to rely on properly basic beliefs, right? Or just basic axioms, or we're going to fall into a coherentist paradigm where the beliefs, the fundamental beliefs that we have are justified if they consist with another web of beliefs that we have, or it's going to be an infinitist view, or there's just going to be an infinite set of justifications for our beliefs. And ultimately, I think that the atheist worldview, since it doesn't posit a necessary mind, it ultimately is going to be shrouded in mystery because it cannot solve or it cannot justify the axioms of classical logic and why they exist. And it cannot justify identity over time. It cannot justify the preconditions for intelligibility.
Hey, Jack. Did you hear me at the end of the last call where I said that identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle are presuppositions?
By presuppositions, you mean that there are things that they're assumed before making an argument?
They are presuppositions. We presuppose that those things are in fact true because we cannot demonstrate that they're true. So it's not that an atheist worldview can't justify reason. It's that nobody can. And the people who want to appeal to a God to try to justify reason are making an assertion that they can't demonstrate is actually true. And it's kind of like saying, but if there is a God who can serve as a foundation for logic, then that would explain it. Well, yes, it does, because that's a tautology. I don't think there is any sort of explanation for the validity of or the soundness of logical reasoning, which is why we presuppose them.
Yeah, but even if you make the claim that you presuppose them, I mean, there's going to be another set of beliefs that you hold it in your background that you think are reliable, right? Like I'm assuming that you don't have any good reasons to believe the external world exists. So you're just going to presuppose that the external world exists.
No.
You don't have any good reason to presuppose that your senses are reliable.
Instead of assuming stuff, why don't we try to have an actual conversation? There are two of us here who would happily give you our views. And I don't even know if Justin and I remotely agree on this. So instead of assuming and telling me what you think I will say, or what you think Justin will say, why not talk about it? Because when you say, oh, I would assume you would say this, what you're doing is arguing dishonestly and setting up a straw man.
Well, what I was saying, Matt, is that you have certain beliefs that ultimately you're not going to justify unless you believe in the existence of the Christian.
Jack, did I ask you what you were saying? Did I ask you what you were saying to repeat? Because here's the thing that I find very, very frustrating. And that is, I just explained something to you and you did not acknowledge it. You did not address it. You just went back to saying and reiterating what you had said before, as if you didn't even fucking listen to me. And that's not the way conversations go. What did I say to you?
To go back,
Here's the test. What did I say to you?
you said to me that instead of telling you what you believed, right, let's have an actual conversation. So I'm trying to have an actual conversation here, Matt.
By reiterating what you said and failing to acknowledge what I had just said.
No, I didn't fail to acknowledge what you were saying. All I'm saying
absolutely,
is that
Justin, sorry, Jack, when somebody says something to you and the next words out of your mouth don't address what they actually said at all, but instead are, what I was trying to say is, that means you failed to address what was said. But
okay,
go ahead.
I'm going to address what you said. So you said that those laws of logic are going to be presuppositions, right? In the Christian paradigm, the Christian worldview, there's an actual abductive case as to why the laws of logic exist. And that's because these invariant abstract laws, right, that are absolute and eternal, they exist and must exist in an absolute and eternal mind in order to ground what's possible or impossible. If you have nothing
Jack,
in your worldview that...
Hey, Jack, I don't want to cut you off, Jack, but because I'm not very familiar with the transcendental argument, do you think you can quickly lay it out? Or because what it sounds like to me is, you're saying from a Christian worldview, but it sounds like to me is you're starting from the position that God exists to explain these preconditions of logic, right? So you're starting from the position that there has to be a mind, right? Because these things exist, because these abstract descriptions like the laws of logic and things of that nature exist. So there has to be a mind. So it sounds kind of like you're begging the question a little bit. So can you run through the argument fairly quickly?
Actually, the argument is, if the laws of logic are eternal and absolute and they are concepts, then if they are necessary, they can only exist within necessary minds. Premise two, the laws of logic are eternal,
just not true.
And necessary. Conclusion, therefore, they exist within a necessary.
That's just not true. Those same laws of logic exist in my mind, and my mind isn't necessary.
Yeah, but I understand that the laws of logic exist within your mind, but I'm saying that there are certain...
You literally just claimed that they existed only in a necessary mind.
Well, I'm saying that fundamentally, when we look about certain axioms, right, within classical logic, there's going to be at least one or few more statements that are going to be true in all logically possible worlds. And I'm saying that if these statements are contained within a mind, they must be within a necessary mind, because obviously contingent minds don't cover the basis for all logically possible worlds. God,
no. Whether or not a mind holds within it a concept is independent from whether or not there is a mind that serves as some grounding for this. That you would have to demonstrate that that's true, because how do you show that logic isn't in fact ungrounded?
Well, when you say ungrounded, are you saying that that's unjustified? Are you using it ungrounding that way, or are you grounding
that there is in fact that there is in fact no justification, no guarantor that identity and non-contradiction and excluded middle are always true? How did you determine that that's the case? Because I can't, and nobody else has been able to so far either. Because
under the Christian paradigm, God knows all true propositions.
I don't care about I don't give a shit. I don't give one fucking shit about the Christian paradigm. When I ask you, how do you know something is true? You don't get to point to your fictional religion to say that that's true.
Well, Matt, you say that's a fictional religion, but under your worldview, there's no basis as to why the laws of
you are done wasting all of our time, because you are not remotely an honest interlocutor.
have the preconditions for intelligibility, Matt.
No, sir. When you say that I don't have a basis for logical reasoning, the truth is you don't either, and I just exposed to that. And so now when push comes to shove, instead of demonstrating the truth of what you believe, you have to just go and put up all of reality as if it crumbles apart. I'm no longer interested in your view, Jack. Sorry.
Possibility.
I'm sorry. But when you start saying, hey, when I point out, how did you determine that these things must have a grounding?
Right.
And your response is to say, well, your view, they don't have a grounding. I agree. And under your view, they don't have a grounding either. What they have is a claim of a grounding.
Yeah. That's why I was going down the begging the question line, because it like you said, it sounded like he started from the position of well, I'm adopting this Christian worldview and I'm using that to explain what we're talking about, which I mean that doesn't bring any explanatory power. So I was not sure.
Yeah, it's so strange because I get it. Not everybody digs in on the philosophy, and I don't remotely claim to be an expert. I'm a bit of a dilettante philosophical geek, but I sorted this stuff out over many debates, including, some with Matt Slick, who has his own version of the transcendental argument. And at the end of the day, what's really happening here for the people who aren't able to follow all this, let me put all this in a bag for you. Logic is the process that we're all going to appeal to for reasoning. What kind of logic? Well, okay. That's up for discussion, evidently between bivalent and et cetera. But the issue here is that how do you know that reasoning is reasonable? How do you know that A equals A? And there's no way to demonstrate the truth of this. Any attempt to show that, here's the problem. Any attempt to show that identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, these foundational principles of logic, any attempt to show that they're not true, you have to assume they're true first.
You have to use logic to do so, right?
Right. So. You can't make a logic. So just as a necessity, we have to acknowledge, I don't have any way to show that there's something that guarantees that A always equals A in every circumstance. I don't have any way to show that. But until somebody demonstrates that it's not true, we are justified in accepting as a presupposition what seems to be the case, that logic or the logical reasoning is in fact reliable. If you want to suggest that it's not reliable, which by the way, the last caller wasn't doing, none of these callers are going to do. No, but none of them will say, oh, logic isn't reliable. What they'll say is, you atheists can't tell me why logic is reliable, but a Christian can tell you why logic is reliable. Because in the Christian worldview, God serves as the foundation upon which logic rests. And I'm like, cool story.
Yeah, but that's all fine and dandy, but prove it.
Yeah. You have to do some actual work to prove it. And when your proof is that a necessary proposition must exist can only exist in a necessary mind, well, that's not true because it exists in our minds. I mean, I understand identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. And then to claim that there must be a necessary mind and going into all possible worlds and all this other stuff, you're still assuming that logic is true in order to demonstrate any of that. This is when René Descartes famously did the cogito of I think, therefore I am.
Right.
People were like, aha, we've cracked the problem of all that. No, you haven't. Because as Thomas Hobbes pointed out, I think it was Hobbes, that the cogito, I think, therefore I am, is still contingent upon reason being reasonable. And while we all accept that it is, you can't prove it. And so it doesn't get to any more of a sturdy foundation than anything else. And the same is true whether you say, I think, therefore I am, or God thinks, therefore we are, which is probably inaccurate.